In the comments, they're all saying it's me. I think many modern Final Fantasy fans are actually Kingdom Hearts fans, and they want FF to be more like Kingdom Hearts. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, except it's more like Mickey Mouse dressed as Squall. Final Fantasy's always been about change. Does Call of Duty have to be an FPS? That's basically the main argument tactic of modern Final Fantasy fans. They can't argue honestly. E33 came, and basically all these arguments just don't work anymore. If Blizzard was like Square, they would make Overwatch and they would call it Warcraft 4. I realize that you're just like me, trying to make history. My poor editor. In defense of the modern FF fans, this is gonna be a good video. There's a reel going around on Instagram and TikTok, which is your sleep paralysis demon is an insufferable Final Fantasy fan. Now, someone sent this to me because in the comments, they're all saying it's me. Now, I don't know whether the creator himself intended that, although if he is making it about another content creator, I can't imagine who it would be, all right? If it's not me, then introduce me at once, because that guy sounds awesome. Anyway, let's see how it goes.
Final Fantasy has to be turn-based. I know each entry in this franchise has always tried something new, but I would like them to rehash the past. I'm nostalgic for a simpler time in my life, and I'm projecting that onto this franchise. No, I want you to remake the game. Just remake it identically to how it was before. Nothing new, please. No new vision for this. Just 30 years ago again, please. Final Fantasy hasn't been good since 10.
I don't know, mate. Demon seems pretty cool to me. Now, I had to hop in and, chuck in my 2 cents there. I was like, Demon seems like a pretty cool guy, And you know what's funny is that when you go down, hey, it's like that one Instagram Final Fantasy guy who does nothing but complain about 7 Remake. I heard the guy's pretty cool. Take pride in the fact that the FF7 Remake subreddit mods has to make a rule that there were to be no more threads screaming about your videos. People have told me, right, that there are FF7 Remake Facebook groups, and when someone posts like a short of mine in there, everyone has a meltdown and then they delete the post. Like, I've become Voldemort to these people. Let's address some of these arguments.
Fantasy hasn't been good since 10.
Final Fantasy hasn't been good since 10. I wouldn't say good, I would say great. Final Fantasy hasn't been great since 10. That is true. 10 is the last game in the series that's kind of universally agreed upon as a great game. It's the last Final Fantasy that had like major mainstream appeal. It sold 22 million copies, all right? This isn't some niche little thing with a cult following. While some after that have sold well, they have never cracked the mainstream. 13 has a weird cult following, but it still has no appeal outside the diehard FF fanbase. 15 sales are a trick that can only be pulled once. 15 sold well because it was the first FF on PS4. It had a gigantic marketing budget. It had the Kingsglaive movie with Lena Headey at the height of Game of Thrones popularity, Aaron Paul at the height of Breaking Bad popularity, and I think Sean Bean was in it as well, I think. And FF15 was also not. 13, it wasn't Stormblood, and it really looked from the trailers and the hype like FF was going to be back, and it wasn't. And the poor sales of FF16 show how many OG fans were not going to get fooled again. Yeah, so to answer your question, yes, Final Fantasy hasn't been great since 10. That's kind of a universally agreed upon point.
Final Fantasy has to be turn-based.
Yes, I would actually argue it does have to be turn-based. It's not the only thing that fell apart, but notice how when they stepped away from turn-based, the whole series went downhill? Notice how like it just went down the toilet pretty much the second they did that? Yes, 10-2 was turn-based, but 10-2 shows that being turn-based is not enough for a Final Fantasy game. It also has to have a strong story and strong characters, and it doesn't. There's a reason 10-2 is part of the Dark Ages. In fact, it's the beginning of the Dark Ages. In fact, many of you who lived through the FF7 to 10 time period, when you saw the cover of 10-2, you probably thought, oh, guess the series is over now. And it was. So that marked the long, sharp decline. You might enjoy 12, but I've never really liked 12's combat. 12 feels like a single-player MMO, and my tinfoil conspiracy theory is that Square made it that way in order to get more people to play FF11. And some of you probably picked up FF11 because of 12, in which case, mission successful. Why? Because as soon as Square made FF11 and started seeing MMO money, remember, this is 2 years before World of Warcraft, as soon as they realized how much money an MMO could make, I think that has dominated their design design philosophy ever since. I don't need to spell it out, but an MMO you pay for monthly. Every month you pay like $10, $15, whatever. Now multiply that. Well, over a few months you've already paid for a whole game. Over several years you paid for like, it's like buying like 10 Final Fantasy games. Like they want you to be doing this. And in 12 you can see the roots of FF14's design. I mean, like just you running from the open world into a town, you get the ... lines, which you'll see in FF14 in the divisions between, say, like Ul'dah and different areas. 12, you're just going to dungeons with like tank, healer, DPS, and all that stuff. Oh, we're talking about the turn-based thing. As we learned from Clair Obscur Expedition 33, turn-based moves at a different weight and speed cinematically than action does. And that's why when there's that big musical transition in that Act 2 boss fight, you know what I'm talking about, where it's like dun 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 dun. Like that works because it's turn-based. Because you can stand there and just really soak it in, drink in, and be floored by that. But you wouldn't be able to be floored by that song as much if that boss immediately started sprinting up and just like punching you in the face non-stop and there was nothing you could do about it. I'm not saying that action is worse. I'm saying that action music can express a different feeling better than turn-based can. And a great example of that is the boss music Birth of the Wish from Nier Automata. You know, dun 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 dun. Or Metal Gear Revengeance. Standing here, I realize. You know what I mean? Like that works brilliantly in action, and it just probably wouldn't work as well in turn-based. Because of that foundation of Final Fantasy being that way for basically 10 games straight, it just does not and cannot hit the same in the modern games. Final Fantasy has to be turn-based. I would argue it does. Let me put it this way. If you're going to replace the foundational gameplay that the OG fanbase loves, it has to be as good, if not better, than what you replace it with. Did I word that right? It has to be as good, if not better, than what you're replacing. And it wasn't. It went from other game companies copy classic Final Fantasy's turn-based gameplay. No company, from what I've seen, copies modern Final Fantasy's gameplay. I've never seen an FF15 like. I've never seen an FF13 like, or a 12 like. In fact, 13 and 16 are kind of in their own categories because they copy the worst parts. 13 copies the worst part of, I think, Persona 3, where main character dies equals game over. You know, imagine if you're playing FF7, Cloud dies and that's game over, even though Tifa and Barrett are still alive. This is a stupid idea. It's stupid. In fact, 13 is, from what I've seen, a great example of everything not to do in turn-based combat. You know, its UI is a confusing dog's breakfast of a mess. As for FF16, I mean, that's just a shallow ripoff of Devil May Cry. And yes, we all know that it's the Devil May Cry director doing it, but no one cares, all right? No one cares about the process when the result is dog water, all right? The fact that Devil May Cry fans say it's insulting to compare 16's combat to DMC, that tells you a lot. That tells you a lot. 7 Remake Rebirth's combat is a very interesting conversation because it's kind of held as sacrosanct that you're not allowed to criticize it or dislike it. I don't hate it, I just don't think it's anything amazing. But the thing is, I will argue this. I might like 7 Remake and Rebirth's combat more if the story and the characters and the tone were intact, if they were really strong, if they were really good, if they weren't completely butchered. But because they are completely ruined, that then affects how I feel about the combat. It makes me less enthusiastic to win a fight when the reward is watching Red 13 sploogie on Cloud's face, which is basically the equivalent of what we get in Rebirth. People might argue that, oh, you know, you never learn this combat in depth. Why do I need to? Like, I've beaten the game, I'm not impressed with the story or the characters. Why would I want to spend as much time as possible with it? And I'm not saying it's the worst system in the world, I'm just saying that, like, it didn't grab me and it didn't grab a lot of people, but you're allowed to like it. I'm losing my train of thought here, though. What was the point I was originally trying to make? Let me just think if there's any last things I can say about this. Final Fantasy has to be turn-based. Does Call of Duty have to be an FPS? What about GDA? Does it have to be a third-person shooter? Metal Gear Solid, does that have to be a stealth game? I'm not sure. Let's continue.
I know each entry in this franchise has always tried something new, but I would like them to rehash the past.
Here's the problem with this video. It's actually like a funny idea, but it gets ruined the further it goes on because this is basically a very dishonest representation of the argument. Notice how Metal Gear Solid 2 played like 1, but with a few things improved or different. Notice how 3 played like 2 and 1. Would you say that like those games are bad because they don't dramatically change the genre every time? Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, 3, and 4 are like all clearly the same series. They're all like these stealth games, and you can even see that in the NES pixel versions. But when they change the combat dramatically and becomes high-octane action, they don't call it Metal Gear 5. They call it Metal Gear Revengeance, all right? That's how you do it. That's how you change the combat or the gameplay dramatically and still have the audience like you, all right? Square tried to do this with Strangers of Paradise. I don't know if it was any good, but I don't think anyone hates Square for making Strangers of Paradise, whereas people are mad at Square for making, say, like FF15 or 16. The second thing I'll say is look at Souls. Look at Demon Souls, and then look at Elden Ring. Demon Souls is 2009. Elden Ring is 2022. But you can tell that they are of the same series, all right? And you can see the evolution of Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, 2, we don't talk about 2, Bloodborne, 3, all the way up to Elden Ring. There's a very clear progression. There's always different things you can do, but like Metal Gear Solid, these always feel like the same kind of game. If Souls is like Final Fantasy, then Elden Ring would have been a turn-based game, and the fan base would have said, oh, that was the natural evolution of this. People crap on Blizzard. Overwatch is a massive tonal shift from this very sort of grim darkness you saw in, say, like Diablo 2 or Warcraft. But here's the thing. If Blizzard was like Square, they would have made Overwatch, and they would have called it Warcraft 4. That's the difference. And that is why a lot of OG fans have a real issue with modern Final Fantasy, is because that's basically what we get. You know, it's very disingenuous. The defenses for modern Final Fantasy fall apart the second you apply them to literally any other game series. Resident Evil is still a survival horror game with zombies, with guns. Is that rehashing the past? What about, if GDA 6 comes out, and it's basically quite clearly an evolution of like, you know, GDA 3, 4, 5, is that rehashing the past? What if GDA 6 came out and it was turn-based? Does it need to do that in order to stay fresh? You know what I mean? See, these arguments are unbelievably stupid and they fall apart the second that you apply them to anything else. The argument about Final Fantasy has always been about change. This is bullshit. FF1 to 10 are all turn-based, all right? 7, it uses like materia. 10, you got the sphere grid. 8, you got junction. 4, 6, and 9, you have like very specific abilities locked to these characters. Whereas say in like 7, they're largely more customizable and it's the limit breaks that kind of define them. But 7 characters don't play like 6 characters or 9 characters, if that makes any sense. And that's kind of what people have always wanted. Now, if you look at say FF12, that is not a clear evolution after 10, you know? There was always this sense that each one was trying to be an upgrade of the previous entry. 12 looks like it's a completely different game. So does 15, so does 16. The whole Final Fantasy has always been about change argument. That is a bullshit argument that was invented by modern fans to cope with the harsh reality of what FF became after Sakaguchi. Don't act like 12, 15, 16's combat are natural evolutions of the genre. They're not. The devs wanted to make more money. That's it. They wanted to appeal to a different fan base. They threw the OGs under the bus to try and get a different audience, and it never really succeeded. And it didn't deserve to succeed, because that's pretty disrespectful. You're very sure that some of these games wouldn't sell or be criticized harsh if they didn't have the Final Fantasy name attached to them. That's true. I mean, the only reason they really sell at all is because of the Final Fantasy name, because that legacy still means something, even though it's in the worst shape it's ever been in. You know what I mean? The problem is it can sell a lot at first and then it quickly becomes irrelevant because none of them stand the test of time. You know, they have no staying power, unlike the Golden Age ones. Where were we? The whole remake thing. Let's see. If Square wanted to pull a different fan base, they could have made something else for them and continued with FF being FF. The problem is they know that nothing else is going to sell like the Final Fantasy name. But what the last thing they seem to want to do with modern Final Fantasy is make it for the OG fans or make it with the same design philosophy as when it was in its golden age. You don't get it. The original formula, why would they pretend it's not good anymore? Well, this is a good example of how E33 made it impossible to use the same modern FF arguments anymore. They don't work anymore. You know, the reason you could get away with saying stupid shit like this in the past is because there was nothing to compare FF to. Like, what was the realistic 3D turn-based JRPG that was a rival to FF? Nothing. And then E33 came, and basically all these arguments just don't work anymore. Because if you were arguing against them before Clair Obscur, it was always a hypothetical. It was like, well, if this existed and if it did that, it could work. But E33 came along and it's like, let's just show you how it works. And bam, it destroyed modern FF. Yeah, the whole rehash the past point. So did modern FF fans look at Monoko from E33 and be like, oh, that's just a blue mage, rubbish? It's like, no, that's the first blue mage we've seen in any major game since Kimari and FF10, you know? FF14's one, that's a bit of a meme, that's an MMO one. But like in a turn-based JRPG, I haven't seen a character who is like a pure enemy skill build. I have not seen a character who literally transforms into different enemies and does their attacks. Is Monoko bad because he basically remixes the best parts from Quina, Quistis, Strago, Realm, Yumaru, and Kimari, and then repackages them into like something new, greatly added to and enhanced by modern stuff? It's just bullshit. So this is going to be a good video. Can anyone imagine FF games past 10 bring in new fans? You've never seen anyone say, I played FF15 and got me hooked on FF. Well, no, but we'll get there.
I'm nostalgic for a simpler time in my life, and I'm projecting that onto this franchise.
Again, this is another argument that doesn't work anymore because of Clair Obscur, Expedition 33. There's a reason you'll see a lot of people say that they thought they were over games in general, and then they played Clair Obscur and realized, like, no, wait, no, it's just a lot of modern games are slop, and modern Final Fantasy has been immensely disappointing ever since 10. It's simply true, you know. The numbers don't lie. Nostalgic for a simpler time in the past, and I'm projecting that onto these games. That's a lot of straw-manning, Space Monkey. You're not wrong, but I mean, like, that's basically the main argument tactic of modern Final Fantasy fans. You know, they can't argue honestly. Where is the comedy in this video? Well, that's what I say. That's what I think is sad about this video, is I think it's actually a really funny idea, but I think it would be a lot better if it was done honestly. What this video will do is it'll be popular with the people who already don't like me and who already don't like OGFF fans, but it's not going to convert anyone. You know what I mean? It's basically preaching to the choir, whereas I think the best content is the content that converts anyone. No OG fan watches this and it's like, oh God, I'll change my ways. And none of them say that. They see it for the straw manning it is. So yeah. All right, let's see the next argument.
No, I want you to remake the game. Just remake it identically to how it was before. Nothing new, please.
When Peter Jackson made Lord of the Rings into a movie, into a set of movies in the early 2000s, that book was from the 1950s. Now, why do we love this? Because basically he translated that as faithfully as possible into the medium of cinema with all the trimmings and all the amazing things that cinema had to offer. You know what he didn't do? He didn't actually make it Lord of the Rings 2 multiverse sequel, you know, dishonestly titled, dishonestly marketed, and then wonder why everyone was pissed off at that. He didn't have Aragorn moonwalk in and then go, what can that do for you? All right, he didn't do this bullshit. At no point did Gimli or Legolas break out into a 3-minute dance scene. I mean, I could go on and on about this. That is the most dishonest way to phrase that argument as possible, but you know what? Let's bring it back to the world of video games. All right. In the video game world, there's basically two ways to remake a game. One is the Resident Evil 1 model, which is you make that same type of game as if it was made today. So, you know, you keep the fixed angles and all that. And the other is the Resident Evil 2 model, which is take the idea of that game as if it was made today. So Resident Evil 2 is originally like a fixed angled game, but now you can move the camera around because we can do that in modern games. Also, I think in the original RE2, you had to play the game twice as Leon and as Claire to get the full story. They changed that for Resident Evil 2. You only need to play it once from start to finish, which I actually think that's a good idea because it's a very hard sell to tell someone they have to play a game twice. The only game I can think of that pulls that off and gets away with it is Nier Automata. And even then, I still know one person who played it once as 2B and he thought that's the whole game. He's like, oh, that was good. It was just really short. I'm like, you only played a quarter of the game, you silly sausage. No, you got to finish it with 9S and then, well, I don't want to spoil anything. So, yeah, what Square did was, it can't even be called a remake. It's like a remakequel, a remake that turns into a sequel or a sneakquel, you know? It's a sequel disguised as a remake. What Square invented is the bad remake model. There's a reason that no other game company is copying the 7 remake model. There's a reason that no other game company ever will remake a game the way that they've remade 7. There's a reason that as soon as people found out what this was, sales for Remake plummeted and were basically abysmal for Rebirth. Let me give you some numbers. Resident Evil 2, the original, sold about 5 million copies. Resident Evil 2 Remake sold 15 million copies, okay? FF7 original sold 15 million copies. What RE2 Remake sold? FF7 Remake Part 1 sold, I think, 7 million. Here's partly why. Even before the whole multiverse sequel thing was found out, a lot of people were already turned off by the fact that it was going to be in 3 parts. All right, and part 1 was going to be 40 hours in Midgard. There was no reason for this. Even if you did this faithfully, this wasn't going to work. It was a stupid idea and it deserved to fail. I would say splitting it into 3 parts hurt the initial game's sales, and then more people didn't buy it once they found out that it was actually like some fanfiction sequel. Rebirth, on the other hand, we don't know how much it sold, but I don't think it's cracked 5 million. Why? Because Square announces when their games hit 5 million. They announced that for the Pixel remasters, they announced that for the Octopath series, but they have not announced that for Rebirth, and they have not announced that for FF16. I don't know what the numbers are, but the only official numbers we have to work with are 1.6 million sold on Steam. Many people who originally also bought it on PS5. A lot of those people are actually the same people. And 2 million on launch on PS5, followed by a 91% drop-off. Not good. Now, I'm sure it's sold more on PS5 since, but I think it's less than 5 mil because they announced when they hit 5 mil, and they haven't. Pixel Remaster sold super well, which is proof of what we want. Yeah. Actually, sorry, it's really bad that the Pixel Remasters and Octopath series have both sold 6 million each, and Rebirth and FF16, the best we know is roughly 3.5 million. That's terrible. Like, imagine if GTA released GTA 1, 2, 3 Remastered and it outsold GTA 5. That's a really bad sign if that happened. That's shocking. That's terrible. Part 3 is going to sell even worse. It just will, because Rebirth turned off a lot of people. Yeah, well, the thing is, I'm personally not closed-minded to change as long as the changes are better, or at least as good. Don't make it worse, though. They made it worse. You can't defend the Cat-Sith box throwing. You can't tell me the Ares scene was done better. You can't tell me Dine was done better. You can't tell me Red 13 was done better.
Oh, don't say that. You're only making this harder.
You can't tell me the pillar collapse scene was done better. You can't tell me, like, a lot of that. President Shinra's death was not done better.
Pull me up. I'll give you all the money you want. I have killed plenty of it.
You can change it as long as you make it better. And I'm really struggling to think of anything that it did that with. It's a tough one. What I like about stubborn OGFF fans is that the reason that they're still, the reason we're still like this 20 years later is because they refuse to be lied to, all right? They refuse to be gaslit by the Square Shield Defense Force, and they refuse to settle for low to mid quality storytelling or the confused mess of a direction that his gameplay has taken. You know what I mean? And you know what? I'm proud of them. If you're an OG fan and you're like this sleep paralysis demon, you all right. Basically what modern FF fans are saying is, why won't you just believe the lies? Why won't you just get gaslit, all right? To this guy's credit, he is saying that 7 Remake Rebirth is different. And many of their fans can't even admit to that. Many FF7 Rebirth Remake fans say that it was 95% the same. Lie. It captures the vibe of the original. That's a lie. The most basic shot-by-shot disproves that. So at least this guy's admitting that they're different. If this guy was an Urukai, or like an Orc Chieftain of modern fans, I've argued with Balrogs, all right? I've argued with the Nameless Things. Okay. I have argued with the embodiment of dishonesty. I've argued with people who say that FF7 Remake's combat is turn-based. All right. It's just, what am I supposed to do with that? You wish you knew what brand of copium they were huffing? You want some? You want to play slop and think it's game of the year? No. I mean, look, it's like when you watch the guy who's crying to the trailer of the new Star Wars movie. You know, everyone points and laughs, but deep down, we all wish that we could be that enthusiastic about stuff that we could love. Check out the man. His name is Drake Cummings. As I say, I think this is a funny video idea. I think the first point is true, that Final Fantasy hasn't been great since 10. I think we can all agree on that. I think this would have been better if he didn't strawman the arguments at the end of the day. But if you want to score brownie points with the people who already agree with you, this is the way to do it. If you want to convert anyone, this is not the way to do it. But it's all right. As Barrett says, You were right. In defense of the modern FF fans who are frustrated and annoyed at the OG fans' incessant complaining, is that many of us in the OG side are probably not the best at explaining ourselves. You know, like Final Fantasy as a whole is a very deep and complicated subject, and during its dark ages, one game might be bad, but the other game is not bad for the same reasons. It's a very complicated subject, and maybe there's many OG fans who are not great at expressing themselves in a way that's simple and easy to understand, and maybe that's where modern fans get frustrated by them. So I'll throw them a bone. I can understand why modern fans get annoyed at OG fans, but we're not wrong. And I was worried how other streamers turn a 10-minute video into a 20-minute. I turned a 30-second one into 30 minutes. Can't wait to congratulate the editor in the YouTube comments. My editors are fantastic. They're brilliant. The thing is, a lot of the Instagram comments agree with the demon because Instagram is where more normal people live. Whereas on TikTok, that's where everyone is like, hey, that's Sebbywebz! I hate that guy! If the only place where people agree with you is TikTok, you're wrong. It doesn't matter what we're talking about, but you're wrong. Maybe Twitter as well? No, actually, no. TikTok, people will say they hate Twitter, but they'll still use it. Whereas most people won't even have TikTok on their phones. It's a real no-go zone of the internet. So yeah. Oh, and Reddit. Yes, if the only place where people agree with you is TikTok or Reddit, you're wrong. I think many modern Final Fantasy fans are actually Kingdom Hearts fans, and they want FF to be more like Kingdom Hearts. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, except it's more like, it's like Mickey Mouse dressed as Squall. You know what I mean? Oh, I want the new games to be action. Final Fantasy's always been about change. It needs to be silly and cringe. I was like, that's what they're saying, all right? And once you see that, you can't unsee it. And it's like, no, you're not an FF fan, you're a Kingdom Hearts fan. Now piss off and go play with Goofy. Oh, I'm sure the KH fandom is gonna love what I just said. But don't worry, I think we'll be all right. In a way, I kind of feel for Kingdom Hearts fans because they know that Kingdom Hearts 4 is probably never gonna come out, so they just want FF to play like Kingdom Hearts, so they have something to pass the time with in between while they wait forever. I don't know, is that the theory? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? But that's something I noticed. The people who come and hate me the most with my takes when it comes to modern FF or FF7 Remake, they often have Kingdom Hearts profile pics. There are even YouTubers who have like openly insulted me, and I can't help myself. You know, I look at their channel, it's like, oh, it's nothing but Kingdom Hearts videos on here. So I think that theory holds some water. I think it's right. The whole reason you bought FF15 was because you like Kingdom Hearts. You disgust me. But I'm happy for you. You live in a good timeline. If you want FF to be like Kingdom Hearts, you live in a good timeline. People wonder why modern Final Fantasy fans so aggressively defend all these poor decisions that are not working for modern FF. But I think I've finally figured out why. Because they have gaslit a billion-dollar company into making games specifically and only for them. That's actually insane, but that's what's happening. Whether Square likes that or whether they ever catch on, I don't know. But the poor sales of Rebirth and FF16 show that these people are not the majority that they want you to think that they are. Yeah, and it's not looking good. I mean, look at the sales of modern Final Fantasy compared to, say, other games that actually respect their OG audiences and their foundational gameplay. The Witcher 3, 60 million copies sold. Baldur's Gate 3, 20 million copies sold. Elden Ring, 30 million copies sold. GTA 5, 220 million copies sold. You know, GTA 5, notice how that never became turn-based or turned into an RTS? It just kind of kept evolving along the same formula. FF16, can't even crack 5 mil. 7 Rebirth, can't even crack 5 mil. This is atrocious. This is really bad, you know? So, like, FF16 and Rebirth are the blockbuster of JRPGs. They should not be getting outsold by the pixel remasters, by the Octopath series. They should not be getting outsold by them. This is cataclysmically bad, but a section of the modern FF fandom will do everything they can to keep Final Fantasy in the squalor that it's in, the pits of despair, because Square, as I say, they've tricked and gaslit Square into making games only for them. Is Square happy about this? Do they even know that this is what's happened? I don't know. But if they ever catch on, well, as Slipknot said, we'll just have to wait and bleed. All right, am I a boomer? You're damn straight I am. In fact, that will be the final end of the video. God, my poor editor. But anyway, react video over. Like and subscribe and all the YouTube Wimmy Wazzle stuff. And yeah, see you live on stream. Hooah!